Let's talk about what not to do when you're trying to fix your marriage after infidelity, because the conversation that I'm about to walk you through is a masterclass of how to make things worse and not better. And I'm not saying that to shame anyone. I'm saying that because if this is your situation, actually, or something even remotely close, these mistakes will quietly destroy any chance of rebuilding trust with your spouse if you're not aware of them. I came across a short clip recently, and instead of reacting emotionally to it, I want to coach through it with you. In this clip, there's a man, a husband, talking to his wife after she's discovered that he had cheated. So, picture a wife, young woman, sitting in a rocking chair, holding a baby who can't be more than 3 or 4 months old. He calls on the phone and he's saying things like, "Hey, we need to figure this out. You can't just kick me out. You can't keep the kids. My mom is beside herself. You're making it worse. You need to figure this out and get over it." And his wife responds with something really important. She says, "There's nothing to figure out. You cheated on me." And instead of slowing down and taking ownership and listening, he doubles down. He says, "It was just one time. It was an accident. It's not like I do this all the time. I said I was sorry. You just need to move out. You need to help me with my mother so that she doesn't freak out on the family or on you." So I want to pause the drama, pause the judgment, and talk about why this approach fails and what it reveals about how people misunderstand repair after infidelity. Let's walk through 5 major mistakes that this husband is making so that you are not the next spouse in line. I take that back. Not 5 mistakes, 6, because there's one underlying issue that is so big, so foundational that I simply could not leave it out when we're talking about infidelity. So make sure that you stay for that one. And in a little bit, I'm sharing the analogy that changed everything for me in terms of how I understand betrayal. One that has helped dozens of my couples finally understand why this feels so catastrophic and get why it hurts the way that it does. You're gonna want to hear that. If you're new here, I'm Danka, married for almost 2 decades, and I've spent the last 13 plus years working with married couples in my practice. Conversations like this, I sit across from them every week. So let's talk about it. Mistake number 1, he's trying to control her response. One of the first things that he says is essentially, "You can't just kick me out. You can't just cut me off. You can't just take the kids." And here's the hard truth. If you are the one who broke trust, you no longer get to dictate how your partner reacts. You don't get to tell her what she can and what she cannot do. After betrayal, the betrayed spouse gets to decide those things. They get to decide what boundaries they need, what feels safe for them now or later, what space they require, what time, all of that. They get to decide that. Trying to control their response doesn't calm the situation, it only escalates it. Because now the message becomes, not only did I hurt you, I also don't respect your right to protect yourself or to need time or your right to decide what boundaries you do need. And that makes repair near impossible. Mistake number 2 that he makes is he minimizes the betrayal. And this happens all the time. I've seen this in my practice, in my office, working with couples for 13 plus years. That shows up over and over in this clip with this man. It was just one time, right? It's not like I do this all the time. It was an accident, as if we had no control over that one time that happened. You're making it out to be something bigger than it is. Here's why minimization, is that a word? Here's why minimizing it kills repair on his part. When you minimize the betrayal, here's what you're communicating to your spouse, whether you're aware of this or not. You're telling your wife, he's telling his wife, your pain is exaggerated. This is not an appropriate response. Your reality is inconvenient to me. My discomfort matters more than your devastation with the situation that, let's remind ourselves, I created. And I want you to hear this clearly. Trust doesn't rebuild when the betrayer decides how big the wound is. You don't get to decide as the betrayer. One time is still one time too many. If you ask any woman, any man that's been cheated on, whose spouse has had an affair, right, with someone who wasn't their spouse, they will all agree on this one thing. One time is still one time too many. One breach can shatter safety completely in a marriage. Infidelity is not measured by frequency, it is measured by the impact. His third mistake is he's telling her to get over it instead of getting curious or even just listening. At one point, he says, you need to figure this out. You need to get over it. And what that really translates to is this. I want the relief and I want it now. I don't want to have to wait for your process, and I don't want to take any responsibility for any of it. Infidelity recovery requires empathy before resolution. You cannot fast forward grief. And if you've ever tried, you know that I'm right. You cannot rush the shock. She will need to do what she needs to do. The person who broke the trust does not get to set the healing timeline. You just don't. You're the one that broke the trust. You're going to have to get on board with whatever the timeline is that your spouse needs, and whatever the timeline is that they're asking for, if they're even willing to give you a timeline. So when you try to force someone to get over it, what you're really doing is asking them to abandon their own experience, abandon their own nervous system, so that you can feel better faster. And here's the thing, that never works. Can I pause for a second and ask you something? If you've been on the receiving end of this kind of minimizing, how did that feel in your body? What was that like for you? If this conversation is helpful in putting words to your experience, make sure that you subscribe. This is the kind of work that I do here. Real talk, real tools, real time. Mistake number 4, he's recruiting pressure instead of creating safety. And this one might be a subtle one for many, but it's incredibly damaging. He brings up his mom. He talks about how upset she is with the decisions the wife is now making in response to what he, the son, did in the beginning to be unfaithful to his wife. He talks about trying to stop her from doing something irrational rather than paying attention to the emotion that his wife is feeling. And underneath all of that is this unspoken message to his wife, hurry up, other people are upset, right? You're the problem. You're creating more problems because you're withholding the children, or you're telling me I can't come home. You are changing your mind about what I can do in our own house. You're holding everybody hostage. Here's why that is dangerous. It turns the betrayed spouse into the obstacle that they were never to begin with. It turns them into the unreasonable one, or the villain even. And I want you to remember this. Outside pressure never creates inside safety. Repair requires protection. It requires for you to step out and say, Mom, this is not for you to deal with. This is mine. This is my mess. I will take care of it. I'm not going to throw my wife under the bus when I've done this to her. Outside pressure never creates safety. Repair requires protection, not persuasion. Repair requires safety, not urgency. Mistake number 5, he's centering his own discomfort instead of her trauma and her experience, her pain. If you listen carefully to the video, and I will put it in the description below so that you can look it up, notice how much time he spends talking about his own stress, his own frustration, his mom, his need to move on, and how little he acknowledges the wife's shock, her grief, her loss of reality, and her fear. This is where I want to move the conversation beyond just surface advice. Infidelity isn't just a relationship issue. It's a nervous system injury, right? It's a traumatic event that happens. The betrayed partner is trying to make sense of a world that no longer feels real or safe. And when the betrayer centers their own discomfort, it deepens the trauma, it deepens the pain, it deepens the wound instead of repairing it. Here's the thing I promised. The image that I often use, I can't remember who it was that explained it in this brilliant way, whether it was Esther Perel or Tara Real, but think of trust like a wall. I know that if I lean against this wall, it will hold me up. No matter how tired I am, no matter how much weight I am carrying, it stands firm at the 90-degree angle as it always has. It's reliable. Now, when infidelity happens, it's like leaning against that wall that you've leaned on 1,000 times before, and suddenly, instead of holding you up like it has every other time, it collapses under your weight. The thing that was supposed to hold you up shatters underneath you. You end up disoriented, shocked, wondering what just happened. That's why infidelity is traumatic. It's not just a mistake, it's a collapse of reality, it's a collapse of safety. Mistake number 6 is he's treating trust like a switch instead of a process. He says, I said I was sorry, you just need to move on. And this is where many people get stuck. Apologies start repair, but they don't complete it. Trust rebuilds through consistency, transparency going forward, humility on his part, and then extra humility on top, and then time, however much the person needs. And on top of all of that, or having all of this be wrapped up in emotional availability to say, I am here to be with you in the mess that I created for you on your behalf, that now you have to deal with without ever getting your input or your approval. So this is the line that I would want you to remember if this was your situation. Saying sorry to your spouse without changing your posture is just another betrayal. So if you're trying to repair a marriage after infidelity, if you wanted to note some stuff down, here's what I would want you to walk away with. Repair is not about convincing your spouse to calm down. That's not how repair works. It's also not about minimizing the damage. That is not what you should go for, because it's not going to help you out in any way, shape, or form. It's not about getting everybody to move on quickly. Not your mother, not your wife, not anybody else that's involved that you're bringing into the picture. Here's what repair actually requires. It's humility instead of defensiveness, ownership instead of explanation. It's patience instead of urgency. And I'd even say patience and time. If you're the one who broke the trust in your marriage, your job is not to manage the outcome. Your job, for starters, is to just simply become safe again. That's the work. That's where you start. And from there, you can follow up with humility. You can follow up with ownership, and then be emotionally available. Humility, ownership, patience. That's the work. Whatever you've been told elsewhere, that's the only path forward. If you are a husband or a wife who's trying to get your marriage put back together, and you're like, we don't have any of the tools, we don't know how we would even go about that, stick around. I talk about marriage and how to do it better and to create a better relationship with your spouse all the time on this channel. Go watch this video next, and I'll see you in there.